philosophy, planes, and Plato. Today, we are diving into a city that's been written about, hyped up, and sometimes even misunderstood. Berlin. So, grab a coffee or maybe imagine yourself sitting in some foreign coffee shop and let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to my podcast. I'm Semra and today I ask, can a city be overhyped? Or is the hype itself creating a psychological trap? But instead of giving you just a travel guide, I want to explore something deeper. Berlin is more just a destination. It's a symbol of freedom, creativity, nightlife, and reinvention. But it's also a place where many visitors, even locals, feel the creeping anxiety of FOMO, the fear of missing out. Now, before you answer that in your head, whether you've been to Berlin, dream of going, or maybe you live there, let's take a moment to step back. What does it even mean for a city to be overhyped? When we say a place is overhyped, what we're really saying is that our expectations have outrun our experience. A few cities sit inside that gap between expectation and reality, quite like Berlin. Let's imagine together. You arrive in Berlin. Maybe you land at BER or you rumble in on a budget bus from another city. You step out, and what hits you first isn't neon lights or skyscrapers. It's something quieter, a little grayer. Wide avenues lined with trees, blocks as concrete apartments, the so-called Plattenbau. Graffiti that looks half political, half teenage rebellion. It's not postcard pretty, not in the Paris sense, not in the Rome sense. And yet, for decades, Berlin has carried this aura, the underground capital of freedom, techno, cheap rent, and endless possibility. People don't just travel here to see sights. They come to chase an idea that here, in Berlin, you might live differently, freer, closer to the edge of life. But here's the tension. Is this real? Or is it mostly marketing? Berlin's hype didn't come from nowhere. From its origins as a medieval settlement, it grew into the stern capital of Prussia, a place where Enlightenment reason cohabited with the shadow of militarism. Even then, Berlin carried a relentlessness. Kant's rational order echoed through Prussian governance, while romantic thinkers in the coffee shops longed for freedom, passion, and transcendence. It was like the city itself lived in a tension between Apollonian need for structure and Dionysian desire for chaos. A tension Nietzsche would later describe as the essence of life. The 20th century thrust Berlin into the role of Europe's most visible laboratory of extremes. Under Nazi rule, the city became a stage for mass conformity and the dangers of unchecked ideology. The devastations of World War I left Berlin not just in ruins, but also in a state of existential crisis. Divided by the Berlin Wall from 1961 to 1989, the city embodied the Cold War psyche. Two opposing worldviews facing each other across concrete and barbed wire. Life in East Berlin was more just than politics. It was a psychological atmosphere, a philosophy of existence, imposed from above, yet reinterpreted in everyday gestures. To live there was to live in a paradox, surrounded by walls not only of concrete, but of thought. The socialist state promised equality, stability, and a collective future but it also demanded obedience, conformity, and silence. The rhythms of daily life carried both comfort and constraint. On one hand, the East German state guaranteed work, housing, and healthcare. Life could feel secure compared to the uncertainties of the capital West. Yet, that same security came at a price. The predictability of life was charged by rigid structures. Career paths were often determined early, political conformity was expected, and surveillance by the Stasi created a constant atmosphere of mistrust. What felt like stability to some could feel like stagnation for others. Many East Germans developed small strategies of adaptation, investing meaning in family life, friendships, and private leisure, while carefully negotiating the boundaries of what could and could not be said in public. For West Berliners, life meant existing as a democratic island within an authoritarian sea. It raised questions about the self and the other, what it means to live in proximity yet be divided, to share history but inhabit separate realities. After the fall of the wall, the explosion of subculture in the 90s took place, and in the 2000s, Berlin branded itself poor but sexy, a city where artists could thrive on little money, where abandoned spaces became clubs and galleries, where freedom wasn't just a slogan, but a way of life. The story spread. Backpackers, DJs, digital nomads, and writers all flocked to Berlin. And then came the hype. Suddenly Berlin wasn't just a city. It was a lifestyle brand. But like all brands, reality gets polished, streamlined, sold. And when you land here with a cabin bag full of expectations, you might start to feel the first crack of disappointment. Because hype is heavy, and no city can carry it forever. Let's pause for a second. This isn't just about Berlin, it's about how our minds work. I don't know if you ever heard about the expectations reality gap. It refers to the difference between what people believe or expect will happen and what actually happens in reality. It shows up in many areas of life, work, and society. In everyday life, people often imagine outcomes more positively and negatively than reality turns out to be. So, expecting a dream vacation to be perfect, but facing crowds, delays, or bad weather. Berlin suffers from the same problem, shared by movies, travel blogs, and social media feeds. People imagine Berlin as this free-spirited capital where life is affordable and creativity is everywhere. You picture cheaper apartments compared to Paris or London. You hear about legendary 48-hour parties, techno clubs open all weekend, and art collectives filling every corner. You hear that it's easy for expats because, well, everyone speaks English. And of course, the history. Berlin Wall memorials, Checkpoint Charlie and the museums, all seemingly at your fingertips. And then we arrive and find supermarkets closed on Sundays. And the housing situations isn't affordable anymore. Berlin has faced a housing shortage for years and rents have been risen sharply. Finding an apartment isn't impossible, but it's competitive and often stressful. Then there's bureaucracy. Experts expecting a seamless transition quickly discover words like Anmeldung and Aufenthaltstitel. Appointments for residence permits or address registrations can take weeks or months. And yes, many offices still operate with paper forms, mostly in German. And yes, sometimes nightlife that feels like nightlife anywhere else, only with longer queues. So if we are lucky, we realize that disappointment is less about the city itself and more about the story told ourselves before arriving. The first time I went, I had all these images in my head. Legendary clubs where the party never ends, graffiti-covered walls screaming freedom, history on every corner. I had this list. Mauerpark Flea Market, Hackische Höfe, Checkpoint Charlie, a philosophical event in the evening. I was ready for Berlin to blow my mind. And sure, all of this is there, but you know what I noticed most? Gray skies. Not so many local shops, long S-Bahn rides, a feeling that I had arrived late to the party, literally. I felt disappointed, and yet here I was, just drinking coffee in a dimly lit coffee shop that could have been anywhere. And honestly, I wondered if Berlin was overhyped. Am I missing the real Berlin? Berlin was living up to a legend. That moment stuck with me, because it wasn't just about Berlin. It was about me, my desire to match my experience to the hype. And the subtle disappointment that reality, as always, is smaller than the legend. Berlin has always been a stage for reinvention. After the wall fell in 1989, people from all over the world moved into abandoned buildings, turning them into squats, studios, and nightclubs. It was messy, chaotic, and free. And out of that chaos grew a myth. Berlin as the place where you can be anyone, do anything, live differently. The city doesn't hand you meaning wrapped in a bow. It doesn't have the neat tourist packaging of Rome with its ancient ruins, or Paris with its boulevard. Instead, Berlin looks at you almost blankly and says, "Okay, what are you bringing to the table? What do you want to become?" For some people, that's liberating. For others, it's terrifying. It's the looking glass self. The idea that we form our identity partly by imagining how others see us. Berlin, in a way, becomes the mirror for this. If you arrive here as an aspiring DJ, Berlin reflects back a version of yourself that fits the story. If you come as a young professional looking for the cool life, Berlin lets you dress that part. If you come as a philosopher or an activist or just someone running from routine, the city has a way of nodding and saying, "Sure, that's who you are now." And yet, the mirror might be deceiving, because mirrors don't create substance. They only reflect what's already there. Which means that sometimes people leave Berlin not transformed, but disillusioned. They thought the city would give them an identity. Instead, it just held up a mirror and waited. Let's take the most famous example, Berghain. If you've heard of Berlin, you've probably heard of the nightclub. It's not just a club, it's practically a legend. People stand in line for hours, dressed carefully curated black outfits, hoping to pass the mysterious door policy. But the hype isn't about what's inside. It's about the thousands who don't get in, who spend the next week talking about it, posting memes, sharing rejection stories. The idea that somewhere behind those walls, life is more intense, more authentic, more meaningful. And whether you make it or not, you become part of that story. I personally pass and don't line up in the queue. No experience can live up to that legend that precedes it. This is where the overhyped question becomes tricky. Berlin may not be overhyped as a city. It may actually deliver exactly what it promises, a stage. What's overhyped is the belief that the stage will give you the script. All this freedom and all these possibilities, ironically, they create pressure. The psychologist Barry Schwartz wrote about the paradox of choice. The more options we have, the more anxious and dissatisfied we become, because every choice means giving up countless others. In Berlin, that paradox is everywhere. Which bar, which party, which neighborhood? The city constantly whispers, You could be doing something cooler right now. And once you buy that ticket, once you start performing on the stage, you run headfirst into the next problem. The endless, nagging fear that somewhere else in the city, someone is having the experience you should be having. But here's what happened. I went back, and this time, I didn't try to live inside someone else's version of Berlin. I wandered the side streets and did street photography. Walter Benjamin said that cities reveal themselves in fragments, not in postcards. And Berlin slowly unfolded, not as the city of freedom, not as Europe's coolest capital, but just as Berlin. Messy, raw, unfinished, alive. Perhaps Berlin isn't overhyped at all. Perhaps it's simply a canvas. A canvas that reflects our own longing to become larger than life, freer than we are at home, braver than our everyday selves allow. The disappointment comes not because Berlin fails, but because the canvas cannot paint for us. It can only wait for the brush strokes we bring. And when we realize that, we begin to see the hype differently, not as a lie, but as an invitation. The question is, what do we do with it? Good night.